Look what I found growing next to the track where I did not plant it. Beans. These are pinto beans. I broadcast a whole bunch of seeds out here in the field, and something brought them over here. And look at that. From the rain, they germinated, and look how fast they're growing and how green they are. I mean, they look good, other than being chewed on by a few bugs. I found another one over here. Look at that. Okay, here's my experiment. And now that we've had a lot of rain, there's actually a few more corn coming up. But look at this stuff. Look how much it's grown and how green it is and how good it's doing. This is just in the native soil. See, look at the beans over here and the corn. I mean, this is all the stuff that did not get eaten. So it's growing in this native soil. And when the stuff is wet, it's actually pretty soft. It doesn't quite, it's not quite as hard to grow in as I thought it was. In fact, it's led me to do a little bit of detective work, and I figured out why my straw garden is not growing. I'm going to take you over there and I'm going to explain to you why. But this proves that with just water, this native soil stuff will grow just fine. And it's staying fairly green. I mean, this is with no help at all. So here we are at my straw garden. Now, in this row here, I had planted beans, and I started those seeds back at the 1st of June. So I planted all the seeds and transplanted all of the starts that I had into a handful of compost. And every one of these seeds came up green. And then as they started to grow, they just turned this kind of sickly yellow color and have just really not grown. I mean, it's been 2 months since I planted these seeds, and they just are really not growing. And all the beans I planted in here died. And all the sweet potatoes I planted didn't really take off. I mean, you can see this sweet potato, and it's just sickly. And I've given it food. I've given it quite a bit of food. I've given it organic food a couple of times, and it has made no difference. Everything dies in this. Over here I had planted peas, and they came up and looked green, and then they all just proceed to die. And these are all cucumbers, and they're just really struggling. Over here, this is where I planted all the yellow squash. All of the peas I planted just proceeded to die. And most of the squash have just never taken off. Now, a few of these over here have finally taken off. But like these russet potatoes just don't seem to want to grow. And the same thing over here, all of my melons and the peas that I planted just won't grow. And you can see that, look, this is, I found out, is wheat. So look, you can see that the wheat on the outskirts is growing, but in the middle of the straw mound, even the wheat doesn't want to grow. And I figured out why. Because farmers do really only one thing with straw most of the time, and that is after they harvest, to get the straw dry as quick as possible, they'll spray it with Roundup or some type of an herbicide that just kills the rest of it. Usually it's Roundup. And what that does is it allows them to very quickly dry out the straw so they can harvest it. And it looks like that's what I got. Honestly, it looks like that's what I got here. And I think the proof of it is, and this is proof of GMO, okay? This is just regular wheat, and you can see the regular wheat does not want to grow in the straw. It grows on the outskirts of it, where it's growing into the normal soil here. But over here, I think this stuff is possibly barley or oats. I'm not sure, but it's not wheat. But this is GMO stuff. This is Roundup ready. This is the kind of stuff that is resistant to Roundup. And it's evident. Look, everything else I tried to grow in there died. And yet this stuff is just kicking butt. This is a real, true example of GMO right here. And I think the only reason why these things are starting to finally grow just a little bit is because we've had so much rain that it's flushed some of this out. And it takes, you know, 5 to 6 months for Roundup to dissipate out in, you know, nature with normal rainfall and stuff. So I think that's what's happening here. That's why over here, this patch here of zucchini was planted once again the seeds were planted in a little tiny handful of compost about the size of a softball. And then once they grew through that, they're growing into the straw, and it's just really suspending their ability to grow. And then this giant one was planted at the same time, and it was planted in the compost alone. But I did top dress it with straw, and it struggled a little bit. I top dressed these with straw about a month ago, and then they just started to go downhill. And I can see why. Same with this straw over here. This one section right here is where all the water from the area drains, and so that would have been the only area to get like flushed pretty good, and I think that's why these have taken off. These are acorn squash. That corn was started and was already 8 inches tall when I transplanted them. They were started somewhere else. I think that they were able to root down through the straw and root into the normal ground here, which is not as dense as I thought. When it's wet, it's growable. And I think these seeds, even though they were started in the compost, they came up quickly, and then the minute that their roots got down into the straw, they've just refused to grow, and a whole bunch of them actually died. And it's the same species of corn as that. Also, you know, these are all these other squash were all planted like this one. They're all planted at the same time. They're all acorn squash. And this is corn I transplanted. That's 60-day corn, sweet corn. This is 60-day sweet corn. It just never really took off. And these are all beans. I mean, look at these beans. These beans are a month and a half older than those other ones that I showed you that are growing out in the wild area. And these just won't grow, and it's because they're poisoned. All this has Roundup poisoning it. It will eventually dissipate. By next season, it should be gone. The same thing goes for this entire row. You can see that the corn just never took off. 2 over here took off. For some reason, they might have just finally rooted past. I'm not sure. They all got fed. It's not a lack of food. They're being killed. If I had planted this stuff just in the dirt, I would have had great results. Things grow just fine out here. Now these potatoes over here, they're planted in straw I got from my neighbor, which had already been out exposed to the elements for who knows how long, over a year or two. So no real Roundup going on in there that I can see. I think these potatoes are doing, you know, normal. At least I think. I don't know. I'll never use this straw again, I can tell you that. So this row here, the peppers and the tomatoes are planted in about a 10-inch layer of compost and about a 10-inch layer of straw on top of that. So these plants are able to root down into the ground underneath and root in the compost. And I think, you know, the compost is so good and healthy, it's keeping these things alive. But I tell you, when I grew peppers before, even in Flagstaff, They always looked better, and these have been also fed, and they're kind of struggling to stay green. I think it's the same thing. I think that it's the straw is killing. All these potatoes died when I top dressed them with straw, and I did that to try to shield the potatoes from the sun. For some reason, the tomatoes don't seem to really be affected by this. I don't know if they're rooting very quickly down below or what, but these have also been fed. Okay, so when I tell you that I have fed the plants, instead of buying commercial organic food, what I did is I made my own. I looked up a lot of stuff on YouTube, and I used a recipe that is a couple thousand years old, done by the Koreans. I saw it on a channel called the Survival Garden Channel, and this guy that calls himself, oddly enough, David the Good, well, he had this recipe. It's called swamp water, and you basically just put a bunch of different things in it, and which is what I've been doing, and it rots down, and then you make a tea from this. And I'll tell you what, this stuff works great. I mean, the plants that I have put it on that were not affected by the straw have done absolutely fabulous. And I think this is what's honestly kept all of it alive. I think a lot of it would have died. Some of it died, some of the beans and peas died before I started really giving them a lot of this food. It took a little while to make it. Basically, it's fermented. You start out with rainwater and some finished compost, which gets it activated, and then I put molasses in there and a whole bunch of different things, and have had all kinds of different activity going on with this, and come out here many a times, and it's been bubbling, and you can tell it's working, and the fermentation process is working, and the stuff that's starting to come back to life, whether the straw got rinsed or the soil finally got rinsed, I'm not sure exactly what's happened, but the stuff that's starting to come back to life that I've hit with the swamp water in the last week have really responded and really started to take off. So I know this is a great thing, and this is something that I'm definitely going to do next year. It's kind of like a liquid compost, if you will. Now, it's funny, I made a video about aminopyralids and Roundup being in either hay or straw. So the place where I did get this straw, I asked if the farm that this stuff came from, if the place I bought it from, if they had known at all if they used the aminopyralids or if they used Roundup or anything. And from what they said, no. And people had grown food in the hay and had no problems. Well, nobody had really grown in the straw, and I bought straw. So it is what it is. I'm debating on, at the end of this growing season, instead of just leaving it in place and continuing to, compost and break it down in place, I'm thinking about putting all this together into giant piles and doing a hot compost on all of it, and maybe trying to hot compost all this stuff through. It'll break it down a lot faster, and I think it'll just burn off any problems. I mean, some of this got used in the process of making all of my compost, and I think it was because it was hot compost that it didn't seem to affect the compost, thank goodness, or everything I would have used it on would have died. So anyway, this is my GMO nightmare. See, this is a classic example of GMO and what they do and why they do it. They use Roundup to kill the straw so that they can get the plants to die and dry out faster, so they can get the straw processed faster and make more money from it. And then they use Roundup ready seeds. That way this stuff doesn't die the next year from all the Roundup that's in the straw. It kind of sucks, because then technically they're selling straw that is, safe for animals. But then that means all these animals that are out there that farmers are using for animal bedding, look how good that stuff is growing. in, you know, stuff that won't grow anything else. Look, I mean, these are beans. These are the last beans alive. Look at that. Look how pathetic that is. Nothing wants to live in this stuff. Oh, here's another bean. Okay, maybe this bean is finally starting to come to life. This is one of the original ones I transplanted. It's finally starting to barely come to life. And it's probably just because of how much rain there has been. You know, look at this. Here's another sweet potato. It's just doing terrible. And it's had plenty of water and plenty of everything, and it just will not do anything. But look at this stuff. I mean, this stuff is just growing like a champ.